In the news tonight, His Majesty the King holds talks in London with British Prime Minister David Cameron en route home from the United States, where he held talks with the US President and leaders of Jewish organizations. A series of car bombs and explosions in Baghdad and Hilla leave at least 49 people killed, mostly in Shiite districts of the capital, and the government blames it on Al-Qaeda-linked terrorist groups. And two of the world's most innovative companies, Apple and Tesla Motors, may be joining forces to discuss a deal that could clear the way for the Cupertino-designed iCar. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. Their Majesties King Abdullah and Queen Rania arrived back home after a trip that took His Majesty to the United States and Mexico, where he held talks with the two countries' leaders and top officials. En route home from the United States, King Abdullah met in London with British Prime Minister David Cameron. Talks focused on the situation in the Middle East, namely efforts to achieve peace between the Palestinians and Israelis in accordance with a two-state solution, as well as the violence in Syria and the need for a political solution to end the crisis. The King and Cameron also reviewed relief and humanitarian aid Jordan is providing to Syrian refugees across the kingdom. Cameron voiced understanding of Jordan's responsibilities towards the Syrian refugees and said the UK will continue its support to Jordan in dealing with the continued influx of Syrians fleeing their country. His Majesty and Cameron also expressed support to the US Secretary of State's mediation efforts between the Palestinians and Israelis. King Abdullah again stressed the need for a just and comprehensive solution to the Mideast crisis, leading to the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. Speaker of the lower house of parliament, Atif al-Tarawni, conveyed a verbal message from His Majesty the King to Iranian President Hassan Rouhani during a meeting in Tehran. Tarawni, who was visiting Iran to attend the 9th session of the Parliamentary Union of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which kicked off today, also met with Speaker of the UAE Federal National Council, Mohammed Ahmed Al-Mur. They discussed the current situation in the region, mainly the Palestinian issue and the crisis in Syria, as well as its effect on Jordan. Director of the Islamic Awqaf in Jerusalem, Sheikh Azzam al-Khatib, said Jordanian efforts led by His Majesty the King thwarted a bid by Israel's Knesset's right-wing lawmaker Moshe Feiglin to cancel Jordan's custodianship of Al-Aqsa Mosque. Khatib said that contacts made by the Prime Minister, the lower house of parliament and Awqaf department in Jerusalem aborted the call by the Israeli lawmaker. He added that Jordan's king, government and people did not spare an effort to protect, maintain, and renovate the holy sites of Jerusalem. Arab member of the Israeli Knesset, Ahmad Tibi, for his part, said the cancellation of the session in the Knesset to discuss the issue was triggered by Israeli fear of Jordan's response. Yesterday, the Israeli Knesset dropped a motion presented for the debate by the Israeli lawmaker on Israel's sovereignty on Al-Aqsa Mosque in occupied Jerusalem. Malala Yousafzai, the young Pakistani education advocate, is in Jordan, where she spent the day today visiting the Zaatari refugee camp. She toured various premises, including schools and playgrounds, and interacted with refugees and learned about their plights. During a press conference held at the camp, Malala spoke of the importance of supporting the children in the Zaatari camp and said that through the Malala Foundation, she will attempt to support the efforts of host communities in the region. She also urged the international community to ensure Syrian children's right to education so that their future and the future of their country is protected.
People to raise their voices for these children, because these are innocent little children and they don't understand the situation, but they understand one thing, and that is that they are now homeless, they're missing their land, and it's very necessary that we provide them a peaceful environment as we have in this camp here.
In Washington, meanwhile, the White House said it is constantly looking at options to make progress on the humanitarian front in Syria and in the negotiations taking place in Geneva. In a statement, White House spokesman Jay Carney said the U.S. still believes diplomacy is the best way to solve the Syria conflict. The White House comments came despite the end of the second round of Geneva peace talks on Syria without substantial progress. Today, photos released by the Syrian media showed the two warring parties shaking hands and laughing after a local ceasefire agreement. The images came from a media trip organized by the Syrian government to the Damascus suburb of Abibla, the latest in a series of districts to agree a truce. And in the ongoing violence in Iraq, bombs exploded in several districts of Baghdad and the southern city of Hilla, killing at least 49 people. 35 people were killed in 7 car bomb explosions inside Hilla and nearby towns, while 14 were killed in bomb attacks in mainly Shiite districts of the capital. 90 people were wounded. No group claimed responsibility for the attacks, but the Hilla police chief blamed it on Al-Qaeda terrorist groups, saying the aim is to confuse the security forces and cause high casualties among civilians. In Cairo, a militant Islamist group warned tourists to leave Egypt and threatened to attack any who stay in the country after the 20th of this month. The group, the Sinai-based Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis, made the statement on a Twitter account. They said they recommend tourists to get out safely before the expiry of the deadline. Ansar had claimed responsibility for a suicide bombing that killed 2 South Korean tourists and an Egyptian on Sunday. State television quoted Prime Minister Hazem Biblawi saying Ansar is a threat to tourists and that their aim is to derail the country's political roadmap. In Vienna, Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Abbas Araqji said that Tehran's ballistic missile program would not be up for discussion in any talks with the world powers. U.S. officials said they want Tehran to accept limitations on any nuclear-capable missile technology as part of any long-term deal reached by Iran and the 6 powers. But Araqji said the agenda is only about the nuclear issue, and this is in the framework of the Geneva Agreement, and no other issue can be part of it. 6 world powers and Iran began talks in pursuit of a final settlement on Tehran's disputed nuclear program in the coming months, despite caveats from both sides that a breakthrough deal may prove impossible. While cautioning the talks will take time, a U.S. official said Washington does not want them to run beyond the 6-month deadline agreed in November. Ukrainian riot police advanced on the heart of protests against President Viktor Yanukovych, and security forces set a deadline to end the disturbances or face tough measures. But despite a 6 p.m. deadline, violence continued between protesters and riot police, and authorities said they would restrict incoming traffic to Kiev to prevent further escalation. Latest reports put the death toll at 9 in today's clashes, which raged for several hours outside the parliament building. One policeman also died from a gunshot. Here's the story.
The Ukrainian capital Kiev was rocked by fresh violence on Tuesday. It was the worst street violence in more than 3 weeks as political tension in this former Soviet republic deepened. Scores of protesters and policemen were injured. There were unconfirmed reports of at least one person dead. Several thousand anti-government protesters clashed with riot police near Parliament. They were demanding President Yanukovych relinquish what they said were his dictatorial powers. A smaller group peeled away and ransacked his party headquarters. Opposition leader Vitaly Klitschko called on President Yanukovych to call off his riot police and announce early elections.
Do this, and it will be a way out.
The mass protests in Ukraine began in November over Yanukovych's decision to forge closer ties with Russia instead of the European Union. They've morphed into a broader attack on Yanukovych and his government. A $15 billion aid package from Moscow did little to alleviate the anger on the street. On Tuesday, Russia blamed the West for the escalating violence. It said Western politicians had encouraged radical forces in Ukraine and failed to condemn the protesters.
Meanwhile, European Union Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton voiced deep concern about the escalating violence in Ukraine. She called on the political leaders to assume their shared responsibility to rebuild trust and create the conditions for an effective solution to the political crisis. Two of the world's most innovative companies may be discussing working together or even joining forces. Apple and Tesla Motors reportedly met to discuss a deal that could clear the way for the Cupertino-designed iCar. Although neither company has commented on the rumors, Apple has long been interested in cars. Apple is also interested in developing technology to predict heart attacks by analyzing the sound of blood as it rumbles around a patient's arteries. Here's more.
Like its old ad slogan, Apple may be really thinking different, thinking about even cars and heart monitors. The San Francisco Chronicle reports that Apple's M&A chief met with Tesla CEO Elon Musk last spring at Apple's headquarters. Citing a source, it says the meeting suggests Apple was interested in buying the electronic car maker, a topic widely rumored among investors. It speculates a partnership between the two could produce an Apple touchscreen on Tesla's dashboards. And Apple's looking at making medical inroads as well. The Chronicle says Apple is looking into mobile applications that could predict heart attacks by identifying the sound blood makes as it moves through a clogged artery. Investors hearting that news, Tesla stock continued its mercurial climb, rising sharply at the start of trade. Apple, which is down slightly this year, was trading higher. If the report proves true, Apple is thinking well beyond the rumored iWatches and iTVs as sales of smartphones and tablets start to slow.
Residents of Maryland and Minnesota are finding new ways to enjoy the recent heavy snowfall by being artistic. They spent the weekend building sculptures of snow to honor some of America's greatest leaders. Dubbing it Mount Snowmore, a recreation of Mount Rushmore, resident of Minnetonka, Minnesota, carved out Presidents George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln. While at Towson, Maryland, resident built a statue of President Abraham Lincoln that would have made the original monument's French sculpture proud. The Marylander recreated Lincoln sitting in contemplation, just as he does at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. And to London we go for Fashion Week. Accessories designer Anya Hindmarch unveiled her collection, looking to household brands from detergents to crisp packets for inspiration. The designer reinvented cereal boxes and packets of biscuits, transforming them into oversized bags and clutches. Models descended down a bar-coded catwalk as others showed off the designs on a runway-style conveyor belt, with Hindmarch showing her designs through the use of colorful, fun accessories and her choice of music. A popular item has been the crisp packet bag, which Anya brought back again for this season's show, but in different flavors. And finally, cold weather continues tonight with frost formation in the late night hours and early morning, mostly in the Badia and the hilly areas. Tomorrow, a slight rise in temperature is expected, creating fair weather conditions in most regions with southeasterly moderate winds. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a relatively cold night, but warm conditions tomorrow with northerly moderate to brisk winds and slightly choppy seas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. His Majesty the King holds talks in London with British Prime Minister David Cameron en route home from the United States, where he held talks with the US President and leaders of Jewish organizations. A series of car bombs and explosions in Baghdad and Hilla leave at least 49 people killed, mostly in Shiite districts of the capital, and the government blames it on Al-Qaeda-linked terrorist groups. And two of the world's most innovative companies, Apple and Tesla Motors, may be joining forces to discuss a deal that could clear the way for the Cupertino-designed iCar. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.